Third instalment of the Holocaust Educational Trust Film Club. I'm Ben Fuller, coming to you from sunny, very sunny North London this afternoon. It's a beautiful day for being outside, which we're not really allowed to do. So that's frustrating. But hope you've managed to get your exercise in today already, out in the sunshine. Work on that tan. I've got my palm trees on my shirt to celebrate the fair weather. Anyway, enough about the weather. So yes, as I said, I'm Ben Fuller, coming to you from the Holocaust Educational Trust. It's our objective, our mission to teach and explore the Holocaust with as many people as we possibly can. We work with communities up and down the UK from all backgrounds to do that. And this is very much a part of that in kind of lockdown world. We thought it would be a good idea to be able to get out to see you in different ways. So here we are online to talk about films about the Holocaust. Hopefully you've had time to watch this week's film installment, which is The Pianist, directed by Roman Polanski and released back in 2002. If you are wanting to ask questions while we're in the live situation, you can do it here on the Facebook, or you can do it via Twitter, and we'll be able to pick up those questions as we go and hopefully address as many of them as we can. So we chose this film for this time, partly because The Pianist, for a part of the time of the film, is set during the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, which began on April 19th, 1943, and lasted about a month. So if we were to travel back 77 years, then we would be reading news articles about this event, because it came out fairly quickly, and the news reached the Allies sort of not quite on live, but shortly after events were unfolding. So we thought it'd be a good film to discuss in late April, since we're going back to that point in the Second World War, parts of this film. But to give a bit more of a broad précis of what the film is about, it's based on the autobiography written by the main character, by Władysław Szpilman, who published his book in 1946. He wrote it very quickly after the experience, and he titled the book Death of a City, Memoirs of Władysław Szpilman. And the book is now available under its sort of more well-known title, The Pianist. So you can go and find that, and I would encourage you to have a read through, because I think one of the questions we're going to be talking about is the authenticity of the film and how closely it represents the story of the book. And in many ways, you can't do better than to just read the book yourself and find out. But I will be talking about that. So Władysław Szpilman was a very accomplished pianist, professional composer. He did a lot of composition writing and toured extensively after the war, but worked for Warsaw's radio station playing piano for them up until the war started, and even as far as he could during the war. He is he's obviously Jewish, and he was living with his family, his mother, father, brother, and two sisters. When the war started, they made a choice to stay in Warsaw rather than to leave the city, if not the country. It's worth noting that Warsaw had a huge Jewish population. About 30% of the inhabitants of Warsaw before the war were Jewish. That's hang on a sec, I've got the stats here because I'll forget otherwise. So we're talking 350,000 Jewish people in a population of 1.5 million in the city of Warsaw. So very much, not only was he kind of a substantial figure for his piano playing, but he was part of a very substantial community within Warsaw. As the film moves on through time, the family has to relocate into the Warsaw Ghetto, which becomes one of the most filthy and horrendous places on planet Earth for the next few years, as the ghetto population swells to some 450,000 in a mere few blocks of the city, and the kind of natural occurrences of malnutrition, disease became rife, and the death rates in the Warsaw Ghetto were thousands per month. So we're dealing with, so the film goes into some of this and looks at life in the ghetto. It covers Spielman's attempts to kind of eke out a living for himself and his family during this period, which he does by playing the piano still. And also how his notoriety maybe affords him some preferential treatment at times, none more so perhaps than the point where he and his family are being loaded onto a train, only for one of the Jewish police to pull him to one side and allow him to escape that moment. So therefore, at this point, Spielman's now on his own in the Warsaw Ghetto. He has to find other jobs as a means of survival, and eventually escapes the ghetto and lives out the rest of the war on the Aryan side, which is a really important kind of part of the story. It's a really significant part of the story, and it's a significant part of a lot of stories. It's thought that at times there was up to 28,000 Jewish people living in Aryan Warsaw, not in the ghetto, in hiding. So there's a whole sort of huge area to explore through that. Finally, towards the end of the film, he meets he comes across a German guard who, for some reason, takes pity on him and doesn't turn him in, doesn't kill him instantly himself, but actually provides him with food and sort of cover for his shelter until the end of the war, when he manages to kind of rebuild something of a life. And the film ends with him playing piano again as part of a large orchestra, and kind of there's certainly a sense of hope to the end of that. So kind of to lead into the questions, one of the key questions is it authentic? And also, what is the film really about? And I'm going to come back to the director here, because I mentioned Roman Polanski being the director. It's a particularly significant thing to talk about the director of a film like this, because he was a Holocaust survivor himself. He spent time in the Krakow ghetto, and also and then was hidden for most of the war under a false name with a non-Jewish family. His mother died, his father survived, and he had all of these kind of things to deal with from his own personal experience, along with his adult life, which is not without its own controversy. A wife murdered, and then allegations of him engaging with minors. So there's a lot going on with Roman Polanski as a person and as a director, and that kind of filters into this film. But to come back to the narrative and what the film is really about, I think we'll come to those questions first and then pick up on some others. It's great to see that questions are coming in on the Facebook, and there's a few questions that have come in over the last week, so I'll try and get through as many as I possibly can. The first question that I want to sort of address is, what is this a film about? What is the kind of the message of the film? Because in many ways we're dealing with a whole bunch of themes. There's quite simply the survival of Władysław Spielman. He engages in various different aspects of life in the ghetto, but ultimately there's a lot of shots where he's looking through a window and sort of observing the events that are taking place, as well as the periods of time where he's very much engaged with the events that are taking place. And so, is this a film of survival? Is this a film about one man's journey through the Holocaust, and someone who comes out the other side with his life intact? Is it a film about resistance? He operates as part of the resistance movement until he manages to escape the ghetto himself. He was in one of his jobs, he was collecting weapons that were handed to the Jewish resistance in the ghetto. It's worth noting that the uprising that took place, and maybe in some ways that word is kind of unhelpful, because it wasn't necessarily there wasn't a specific trigger point that the Jews themselves came up with. It was when the Nazis decided that they were going to infiltrate and try and empty the ghetto, that the last very young group of Jewish people standing said, right, we're not going to go down without a fight. And it certainly wasn't an uprising with the aims of, they really didn't have the aim of escape. I was just reading from David Cesarani the other day, who says that one thing they'd forgotten to plan was their escape, because they saw it as, we know we're going to die, so we're going to go down with a fight, and we're going to show that we're not going to go like sheep to the slaughter. So is this a film about resistance? It certainly comes up a lot. I think we have to acknowledge the fact that this, is this just a film about inhuman destruction? Because there are endless scenes that are very, very hard to take, where we see death and the persecution that the Jews faced in life in the most stark ways. Polanski took episodes from the book, and he said that he was trying to give an authentic representation of the book. But along the same lines, he clearly is trying to give an authentic representation of his own personal experience. And he doesn't necessarily hide away from that. For example, one of Jess Hamilton's picked up on this when she asked the question, does the fact that Polanski used his experiences in the Krakow ghetto as a reference point for the film, which was set in the Warsaw ghetto, does this distract from the story? So the don't run, walk comment was not Spielman's experience, it happened to Polanski. So just to pick up on the specifics of that comment and where it comes in the film, as Spielman is pulled out of the line to get on the cattle cars that is destined for Treblinka, the death camp. A Jewish policeman pulls him out and says, you get out of here. He starts to run, and the comment comes from the policeman, don't run, walk. The implication being that if you run, then you're kind of going to draw attention to yourself. If you walk, look controlled, then people will ignore you. And that is not the reality of Spielman's experience. He did run, but Polanski, in a very similar situation, was told, walk, don't run. So Polanski's put his own experience into the film there, perhaps because of his personal kind of desire to have some kind of autobiographical element to the film. I'm getting a message on my screen that's saying we're having trouble playing this video. I'm going to carry on for the meanwhile, and if it disappears, or if I've disappeared, then I apologize. So yeah, there's very much an element of the story or the film, that is Polanski responding to his own childhood, and we have to acknowledge that. The fact that Polanski himself is a survivor reminds us that there are elements here that are, this is his experience as well as the experience of the book. So in that sense, I think there's a certain amount of authenticity to many of the scenes that we can see. I'm getting a message saying that the stream is still working, even though I can't see it. So I hope you can, or at least hear it. And Annabelle also commented on a similar point, that this is a film based on Spielman's memoirs. So can we accurately and authentically say that The Pianist is more a documentary stroke testimony than an artistic and directorial portrayal of history? And I think that's a really interesting question from Annabelle, that kind of links with Jess's question, that there's clearly an effort to represent closely the past, albeit with Polanski taking his own experience and implanting that onto his film. But I do think that having, I've kind of bashed my way through the book this weekend, and I could see that by and large, the film has been fairly a close representation, at times taking episodes that are placed in the book and reorientating them, because don't forget, in the 2.5 hours of a film, or the 2 hours, 20 minutes, whatever it is, that it's just not possible to cover the 6 years that Spielman speaks of. So what Polanski's done, as any director would, I imagine, is take the key episodes, the key moments, the key messages, and cram that in. So at times there's elements of simplification, not least the amount of moving around that Spielman had to do, the different jobs he was involved with. We don't get the full sense of that picture, but what we do get a sense of is his struggle throughout. And so I'd say that Yeah, to some extent, Annabelle, there is a sort of a docudrama feel to this, and I'd also say that I was kind of reflecting on where the narrative lies, and we don't necessarily have too strong of a narrative beyond just following one man's route through the events. So there isn't love interest really. There aren't those other hooks that films use to kind of get our attention. The point is, it's very engaging from start to finish based on the experience and the experience alone. Um, okay. I want to come back to that question of what the message and what it's about, because if we look to Polanski himself, then he believes that this film is a film about hope. And through the story of the one man survival, we should find hope, and perhaps that's why he finishes the film with Spielman playing with the huge orchestra in a very grand arena, to say, look, this is despite everything, he comes out on top. He comes out with his love of art. I think that's a big part of it. The artist as a or the art as a means of finding humanity again. And another comment that came in was about him playing the piano or hovering over the piano when he couldn't play, when he was hidden in one of the rooms in Warsaw, and that was his way of remembering himself, remembering his humanity in a period of time where the only thing that he had to work with was survival, which almost kind of forgets who he is as a human, but just focuses on staying alive. Okay, next question I want to look at is a really interesting one that came in from Robin Whitlock. Thank you to you, Robin. More of a statement than a question, but I think it raises some interesting questions. He says, particularly strong moment in the film. I'm going to pick up on one of the two, if you don't mind, Rob, so I can spread the questions out. But that conveys the horror, or at least as it happened in Warsaw. The first scene in which the Jews are being moved into the ghetto in full view of onlookers on the street. The scene is just so well presented, I can even imagine it happening in the street near me, with gloomy music accompanying it. It is truly upsetting. And yes, I'm going to pick up more on the scene and the music at this point. I think there's a question about music that I might come to in a short while. But yeah, I think that scene does raise a whole bunch of questions, because what we're looking at, obviously we're looking at the Jewish people who are being forced into the ghetto, and the camera's directed at them, but it's very deliberately not purely about them. The scene is about, I think, the people who are watching, bystanders, and it raises enormous numbers of questions. And this is one of those examples where Holocaust education kind of reminds us that there are more questions than answers in these kind of issues. And we can't have the answers. Like, what the question that I always want to know is, what are they thinking? What are these people on the street thinking? Why have they stopped to watch this thing happening? It's a horrific thing, whether they were in favor of it or not. There's going to be I kind of find it hard to just stand by and watch, but at the same time, I suppose it's that kind of car crash thing that we always have a look. So, it makes me wonder, would it be better to watch than not watch, to kind of accept this as the reality I live in right now? Is this something that we put under the sort of umbrella of complicity or even collaboration? What if you're not helping, then are you hindering the plight of the Jewish population? But at the same time, before we jump to conclusions and judgments, it's probably worth thinking about what the consequences of any kind of rebuttal might have been at a time like that. We know that in Eastern Europe particularly, the Nazis were absolutely ruthless when it came to resistance and rescue, and they would not hesitate to kill people who were involved with that. Interestingly, less so in the West, where prison sentences and stuff like that were more common the case. It's also made me think about the impact on the city of Warsaw. Like I mentioned earlier, there's 350,000 Jews in Warsaw. That's 30% of the population. That's 30% of the workforce, the infrastructure of the city. And that's just being removed in this instance. And the kind of questions and what really is happening here that that scene kind of pushes us to think about. I think it is a really powerful scene, and it is an incredibly horrific scene, because we're not seeing people respond. We're not seeing, but I don't think when we don't see the response, that doesn't necessarily mean there isn't one. And I do think we need to be careful to jump to conclusions about what that means. Doubtless there was anti-Semitism, but this was a city, like I said, where the Jewish population was integrated into the lifeblood of how the city worked. So perhaps it's there's more going on there than meets the eye, or certainly it's a moment to stop and consider what bystander behavior really means in a situation like that. Okay, a couple of questions that are coming in as we're broadcasting. So I'm gonna pick up on one. Hang on, where is it? I found it earlier and then I lost it. I think a discussion of music would be really interesting. Usually I'm unsure about music in Holocaust-based films. The music, especially in Schindler's List, is very well played by big, grand orchestras. Is it ill-fitting to have this music, which is played well and could elicit some sense of joy, or does the juxtaposition in The Pianist work? Thank you, Alison, for that question. It's really an interesting thought about how you develop a soundtrack for a film like this. And I think that Schindler's List does a very, it's very moody music. It's kind of music to encourage the feeling of the film in large aspects. Whereas The Pianist, like you say, this is a person whose joy comes from the piano. And the piano music that is played throughout the film, particularly by him, is going to elicit joy. It is beautiful to watch. Adrian Brody clearly put a lot of work in to get that right. So, and it's wonderful music, and I think that is an interesting juxtaposition. I think it is the scene where he's desperately trying to play through the bombing that's happening all around before the station has to close down. That is an example where there's a slight bit of artistic license taken to just cram that kind of sense of him still working while the city's being bombed took place. But I think, I think it's quite interesting. It's quite a clever thing that Polanski's trying to do to get a sense of to juxtapose, to say that there is joy at the same time as this sense of hopelessness that would have been felt by many people, and maybe by using that music during the film, he's challenging us with that. I want to come back to another question that I seem to have lost, but I can find it in a minute. There's one here from Steve, who is now a regular viewer, I would say, because he wrote a question last time. I think it is important that the film shows a clear difference between Jews in the ghetto, those who had and those who had not, those who agreed to be police and those who didn't, those who fought back and those who didn't. Yeah, I think that's a great point, Steve. We get an impression from this film of the diversity within the ghetto. It's very much the case that Spielman's personal position gives him a viewpoint of those different aspects, because he has to walk through the worst parts of the ghetto to get to his job, which is at a cafe where the wealthy in the ghetto go. And the scene where he's asked to stop playing so that a couple of gentlemen can test the gold coins to see if they're genuine or not, that is taken from the book. That's something that he had to endure. And I got the impression from his own memoir that Spielman found that quite frustrating. He wanted to be able to be appreciated for his art, and having all of these yuppies talking over him didn't impress him a great deal. But then, in almost the very next scene, he's walking around corpses on the ground in the ghetto. So you get, again, that difference. And I suppose maybe a broader element this could bring into questions around life in ghettos is just that people were forced in to a very, very tight space from all kinds of backgrounds, and that brought together the wealthiest and the poorest in society. And also, as the Warsaw Ghetto expanded over time, Jews were brought in from other parts of Poland and even other parts of Europe, which meant that the ghetto becomes an incredibly diverse place. So the kind of natural way we might think of it to be an experience that would be the same for one as for all is kind of blown out by what the film does there, and by developing our understanding of life in a ghetto, particularly one as enormous as Warsaw, then yeah, we do get to find out the diversity there. So yeah, really interesting question, or really interesting point, Steve. Thank you for that. A question from Mariana, apologies if I pronounced that wrong, is how reliable do you think Vladislav Spielman's depiction of his experiences are? Well, I guess in that sense, we've the film and the book, or the film relies heavily on the book. We know that there's documentary evidence for much of what he did in terms of his jobs, in terms of both the underground work and the piano playing that he did, and his experience towards the end with the German officer Hosenfeld, who helps him. Again, we know about the accuracy of that, and it's something. It's a sad way that Hosenfeld came to his end in a Soviet gulag, because he'd spent much of his time in the war writing a diary about the experiences that he was witnessing. He was absolutely appalled by the Nazi racial ideology. He was not a kind of willing participant. In fact, he helped several Jewish people. Spielman was not the only example for him. So I think that we can say that this is, in terms of Spielman's book, pretty reliable. He very deliberately wrote it as soon as the events were over. He wanted to write an account. Naturally, with any, memories are a funny thing, and people write things the way they write them. So I'm not going to say it's 100% accurate, but I do think that the film is tied very closely to the book, and the book, I think, most of which can be sort of corroborated. And also, I'd probably add that Spielman doesn't really big himself up desperately within it. So it's not an example of someone who's trying to kind of get his to glorify his story. He is trying, and as that original title he wrote, "The Death of a City," this is not something that's necessarily about him, but it's his experience through. So I'm fairly sort of content to say that it's a pretty accurate depiction of his life, and that within that there are accuracies of the Warsaw Ghetto, albeit it's confined. It lacks the expansiveness that a film just cannot do. That's where we have to kind of get our thinking caps on and go hunting for our own knowledge. Probably worth at this point mentioning that the Pianist is used in some of our own resources at Holocaust Educational Trust. So if you head to our website, het.org.uk, you can find resources around resistance, where we've used excerpts from the Pianist. And there's a whole bunch of resources there available for home learning at the minute, from family learning for age 10, 11, right through, as well as a big Key Stage 3 home learning sort of pack that we've produced. So if you're a teacher or student, that's where it's going. If you're not, then you can go there too. Okay, there's another question here about the Jewish police, and I think that's an interesting one. I'm very conscious that we've got about 2 minutes, so I'm very quickly going to answer that. That's from Jack, so thanks, Jack, for writing in. Is the way the Jewish police are shown and talked about in the film realistic of the way people thought about them at the time? Broadly speaking, yeah, I think it was. I think the Jewish police were hated, to be sort of broad brush with this. The Jewish police were not appreciated by the Jews in the ghettos. They were considered sellouts. The accusation of collaboration was thrown at them, and yeah, no one really liked the Jewish police. They thought they were helping the Nazis do their evil work. So, on that. So having sort of given that side, I just want to throw a couple of other things from the other side. And that this is that one, we have to remind ourselves that what was to come was never known by the people at the time. We know it in hindsight. We know where the train's headed. We know what they're going to have to do. But I do think it's worth kind of remembering that the people at the time did not know what they are going to have to do. And there were also people that were just thinking, what can I do to survive the next day? How do I ensure I get food for myself and my family? And so whilst it's easy to make judgments, I think it's really important that we encourage reserving those judgments rather than launching into them. There's post-war as well, particularly in Israel, Jewish police were, you didn't want to admit to having been part of that. No one was appreciative. And like I say, the word collaborator was thrown around a lot, which I find quite difficult because I think for any one of these people who was involved as a victim of persecution, to call them at the same time a collaborator under the experiences they were going through and the pressure that they were under just to survive, I think that's a little bit harsh, in my personal opinion. But and I'm reminded, I think I've already mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, but Primo Levi encouraging us to understand but not to judge when we're looking at these people who are making sort of choiceless choices. It's survival or not survival. It's do a job that I don't want to do or do something that, or I don't know what. So there's an awful lot of really, really challenging stuff going on here. Guys, I'm aware that we've now pretty much reached the half an hour point. In fact, we just have. So that you get to hopefully go for a little walk and enjoy the evening a little bit, I'm going to wrap up. I just want to pick up on a couple of comments that are coming in though. Firstly, I've got to share this one from Abby, who says the home learning pack is brilliant. I was using the educational resources before lockdown. Highly recommend them. Thank you, Abby. We love a bit of promo like that. I also want to pick up on this point from Ms. Weir, who says, I've just watched Hunters on Amazon Prime. It'd be interesting to have a discussion on the ethics of revisionist history, and it'd be great to hear your views. Interesting one. We've had some things to say as an organization about the portrayal of revenge through Hunters. I haven't seen it myself yet, so I'm going to reserve judgment, but perhaps that's one we can come back to. In short, though, the idea of revenge as opposed to justice is controversial. We know that post-war justice was sought. I don't think revenge was necessarily the high priority. Someone asked a question, and I've lost it, so I apologize to you. I can't give your name, but someone asked a question about gender in these films and the role of women, and I do think I'd really like to pick up on that in another kind of episode of this and another film. So definitely going to think about that. And how do we think we should learn from his experiences? Another question. And I think learn about his experiences. And maybe, I don't think that he personally was saying, I want to share this as a story of hope, but I think it's for us to kind of just define the meaning we take from these things. You know, Polanski said this is a film about hope. I don't need to agree with that. He's made a piece of art and I can decide what I think of it. So I think the sort of how we learn is develop our understanding, take it further, and hopefully and draw our own conclusions. I think we really want to encourage that. Okay, final words is to advertise next week, which is 2 weeks' time. We've got Life is Beautiful coming up. Slightly different tone to this film. It's an Italian film. It's a comedy, but it is very much set in the Holocaust. It's also a PG, which I was quite surprised at. I thought it was going to be a 12, but there we go. So one that you can watch at home over the next 2 weeks. Not quite so heavy, which I think we'd probably all appreciate right now. So yeah, do have a view of that film, and please do send your questions in. I'm really enjoying this. I'm sorry I can't answer all the questions that you're asking, but I'll do my best, and I'm going to kind of look through them and see if we can't kind of do some kind of filler for anything that has been missed. Okay, guys, thank you ever so much for viewing, taking part with the questions. Do continue to send questions, comments, and all the rest of it in, and have a lovely sunny evening. All the best, guys. Stay safe. Ciao, ciao.